As you saw on the like in the announce, I'm going to present here some environmental art at the intersection with science and technology. And even some of the works might seem to you not art, so we can discuss these too, especially the first one I will start with. I think it's very important. And I'm not going to present myself. I'm working in Institute of Philosophy and Sociology at the moment. And tomorrow I will present myself as also director of Symbiomatter, Experimental Arts Lab. So, just to say just a very few words, what is art, science and technology about? It's using the ability of art, artistic approach, to question the industrial approaches of exploitation of planet resources and all living beings by the commercially driven technologies and science. So it's using technologies and scientific methods, but to ask questions which art is asking, which are critical, etc. I'm not going into depth into this because I want to have more time to show you the works themselves, and you will get it. And if there are questions, of course, we can discuss. And so one of the things which art does, unlike science and technology, is that it tries to imagine different stories about the past or about the presence. For example, in the presence, it tries to make the invisible visible and just basically to show through the senses certain things, not only concepts but also invisible energies or things which are around us. And also tries to invent new futures, to think in a new way about the future, which science and technology somehow foreclose, and to new ways of production of knowledge. Some of the ideas which driven this kind of art is cybernetics, which are new ways of thinking about processes, materials and systems, basically systemic way. Also the Anthropocene, this is a new thing which happens around us at the moment, and it asks us to reinvent how we think about the human place on the planet. Also, of course, climate change is related to this, new ways of thinking about the planet again, but also in terms of its cosmic rhythms. And ecology, how we can live in this planet together with other living beings, but also in terms of not human-centered, not anthropocentric way, but multi-species, taking the other living beings as equals. Symbiosis is also similar to that. Instead of focusing on competition, survival, and Darwinian understanding, more like thinking about togetherness and collaboration. And I'm starting with Hans Hake work, which everybody knows, just to show what does it mean thinking cybernetically about processes and systems. This is taking some scientific process, which is condensation, and making it into an artwork, into a process, into a system which is self-sustained and self-sufficient and works like a cybernetic system. But that's really just a few words. I'm not going into that. And now I'm going more in depth. The first work is artist called James Bridle, but yeah, he's an artist in a more broader sense of the word. New type of art, which is more like politically oriented as well and more systematic approach. And I'm presenting his work, which is called Server Farm. And where does he start questioning things in order to reach his idea? First, it's about certain ways we think technology. We think technology in certain ways, and he tries to rethink technology through life than the other way around. And now I'm just putting some questions first. First is that on the left side we see the graph of Moore's law. I guess you all know Moore's law, but it's basically formulated in the 60s, and it's the idea that he observed that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit doubles every 2 years. And he predicted this to happen about 10 years, but actually it happens ever since. Every 2 years it doubles, and even when we reach a point when it seems impossible, we still find a way to hack it and to continue to improve the power of computers. And on the right, it's a similar type of graph, but it shows the Keeling curve. The Keeling curve is a daily record of global atmospheric carbon dioxide, CO2, concentration since the 1958, and as you see, it's always growing up, which is definitely not a good thing. But according to this artist, these two graphs are deeply interrelated because computation actually is a huge contributor physically and literally to a warming planet. Because the way we've built computers is incredibly destructive. We learn now because, first of all, in the way we extract minerals we need for our mobile phones, computers, and everything, and electronics, we extract them in a way which destroys the planet. First of all, it's very toxic. This is just an example of pipes in China, because China is the place where they extract these minerals. It's called rare earth. It's very toxic, and it goes into lakes and it destroys the whole environment. And it also, the way we use internet, for example, the way we use computers is extremely consuming energy, and it releases a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. For example, the cloud has a carbon footprint that is a little bit larger than the entire airline industry. And only one YouTube movie, when we watch only one YouTube video, creates a heating impact on the servers that video is running from, equivalent to using a refrigerator for a month. So, according to James Bridle, we screwed up badly, and we need to remedy that. So our technology is not really doing well in the right direction. But the other effect of computation, I'm not going into what computation is, but we kind of know all, is not just physical but also cognitive in really important ways. As we kind of surrounded the globe with computation in a way, it radically shapes the way we think. We come to think essentially like computers. Everything we do is put through this narrow tunnel of what is computable. When I'm saying we, I mean science, technology, all the processes which run our planet, which govern us. Everything else, everything which is not computable, get erased or constricted into these databases boxes. Everything which computer can compute has to go to become data, but you cannot turn into data everything. And in order to turn it into data, you have to squeeze it in a certain way. You have to, including nowadays, artificial intelligence is trying to use people's feelings, attention, energy, things like emotional things, things like love, things like friendship, things which we have never thought trying to compute. They try to compute them in order to govern and to manipulate people, for example. And and what we cannot put into data, and it becomes unthinkable. So we need to think of other ways to think with the scale, creativity, and power of computers, but not to the narrow tunnels of the machines that we have created so far. So to be able to use technology in a creative way, because it helps us a lot to study phenomena, but to rethink technology in a new way. And he gives an example of a very interesting living organism. Do you know what is this? No, it's called slime mold. It's from the archaea thing. It's neither bacteria nor the multicellular organisms, but archaea. Archaea are organisms which have they have a yadro. No, not core. The thing in the cell. Nucleus. They have nucleus, but it's one cell. So this thing, which you see, it's in a petri dish, but basically in the nature, it lives in forests, and it eats bacteria, it eats fungi, and it can reach 10 meters in square meters, but it's still one cell. And it's a very interesting organism. I'm not going into this, but it's a very interesting organism. I have worked with it a little bit. So it behaves like one cellular, but at the same time it behaves, because it can move, it grows with a filament, on, like you see, sides, in order to reach for food. And then when it reaches for food, it creates this kind of intricate networks in order to connect all the parts of its body in order to feed it equally. So they started making experiments with it, like experiments to investigate into primitive intelligence. So it doesn't have brain, it doesn't have nervous system, but it still behaves intelligently. And this is an iconic experiment from the 2010 in Japan, which shows how these are the oat flakes in a petri dish, because this is what in a lab this organism eats. In the forest it eats fungi and bacteria, but in the lab it eats cornflakes, oat flakes. And they made the oat flakes in the mapping the cities around Tokyo. So in order to see how it's going to connect these dots. And this is what happened. Let's see if it will start. Okay, so here you can see how it moves. Of course it's stop motion, it's very fast time-lapse video, because it moves very slow. It moves 1 centimeter per minute. No, less. More slowly, I think. You take time-lapse in order to show, but what you see is how it maps the Tokyo metro. How it really maps all the oats which are in the shape of the Tokyo metro around Tokyo, the cities, and it does it in 26 hours. And I will explain why this is important. So, can I just again? This is important. Here you can see on this, the right scheme, you can see how slime modeled the network, how it covered it. So it starts spreading, and the moment it reaches all the points which have food, it starts just creating only threads in order to most efficiently transfer the food between these points into its body without losing energy. So it covers, it makes a scheme like this on the left, and the Tokyo metro, the Tokyo rail map is on the right. It covers it almost 100%, but even what I read is its way it covers, it's even more efficient in certain way, because what is this? This means that you have to cover the points in a way which is robust, so it can go from each point, it's robust, but it's also the most effective, the shortest way. And this is called the traveling salesman problem. And the traveling salesman problem in computers is extremely complicated problem. It cannot be solved by computers actually, because, okay, it can be solved if it's very few cities. The traveling salesman problem is a mathematical problem, but it's a kind of colloquial name, which if you're a traveling salesman, you have 10 cities, for example, to visit, but you need to visit only once each city, and to make the most efficient way how to visit them only once, in order to save time and to travel least, and so in the short possible path. And on the second one, we see the moment you add only one city to the equation, it becomes exponentially more complicated. But on the right, you see the Tokyo Metro map. And if anybody of you knows and have been to Tokyo, Tokyo is the most complicated metro lines map in existence. And in order for them to calculate how to make it the most efficiently, it took them hundreds of years of the most brightest brains, engineering brains, at the time. While the slime mold did it for 26 hours. And it does it in a way we don't know how, but it does it in a parallel fashion. It goes in all directions, and then it finds the best way to connect. And the idea is that the idea of this artist is that basically we can find in nature, now it's called biocomputing, it's not only art, science is doing this as well a lot. They try to use the ability to living beings, especially to slime mold, to process information in a way which gives us questions, solve certain problems in computing which we cannot solve with computers. But what is more important from the point of view of this artist is that there are certain questions we cannot even ask because we don't know. Because we ask questions only from the perspective we already have about technology and about the world through technology. And if we start listening to the living beings, how they process information, and start taking them more seriously as knowledgeable beings and not just as a resource for us to sustain ourselves, then they can give us not only answers but also new questions and new ways to consider what we can ask and how we can see the world. And the idea is slime mold can answer many more questions which computers can't, but we don't know even how to ask. Another similar things which he observes, also known from science, is the so-called mycelial networks. I guess all of you also have heard of it, that we actually have found that we live in that underground, in forests and in many places, there are networks of mycelial fungi, basically, because mycelial fungi, the mushrooms we love so much, is just the fruit of something which is very vast network under it. That's why it's very difficult to grow some mushrooms or some trees, because if you grow them outside of their ecosystem with this mycelial network, they cannot survive. It's a whole ecosystem of symbiotic relationships between mushrooms, between fungi, between bacteria, and between plants. And they transfer not only nutrition, but they also transfer because they are symbiotic. So, for example, bacteria process certain nutrients from the soil, give to the tree process photosynthetically certain, for example, sugars and gives to the bacteria and also to the fungi. But also they exchange communication through, like information through these networks. Information about predators to the trees, they send through the networks to other trees, etc., etc. And so this is a knowledgeable network. It's a network just as our internet works, but for plants. And it's been there for millenniums. But but what James Bridle explains and observed is that we actually could notice this thing which is under our feet for millennia after we found the internet. And because the internet made us start thinking in a new way, start finding new mathematical formulas and equations to think network theory, to think how our internet is connected and works. And these are new ways of thinking of networks, of connection, of just generally thinking of systems and networks. And this allows us to notice that this happens also in the soils. This is again an example of how we are constricted by our technologies. They both constrict our vision and what we can know, but also they allow our vision because new technologies expand the way we see the world. But that's why it's very important, what are these technologies? And another thing which he draws upon, again from science, is this kind of plants. So it's from science and from biology. Science has found that some certain plants can not only survive in toxic environments where other plants will die, but also they can extract the metals, the heavy metals from the soil and survive, accumulating them into their leaves, so somehow separating them from their living system. And what we see here is a X-ray fluorescence microscopy image of a seed capsule of the nickel hyperaccumulator plant Alisumurale. The red color shows its structure, whereas the green color shows calcium, accumulated calcium, and the blues show nickel. And the idea is that we don't only study these plants. One way to study these plants, one way to use them is to clean the soil from the heavy metals, but there is another way to use them, and this is the idea which Bridle takes, and it's he collaborates with Greek and French scientists. We can use this plant for harvesting heavy metals. Harvesting the metals we need for our electronics, for example, or for something. And another thing also from science, very recent, is in MIT they did a research, they incorporated nanotubes in spinach leaves in a way that these nanotubes begin to fluorescent, to emit fluorescence light, which can be read by infrared camera, when there is certain metal or some kind of toxic element present in the water or somewhere. So they extract it and emit a light, and also the infrared camera is connected to email and can send an email to the user. There is certain kind of chemical element in the soil or in the water. And in this way, we can use actually plants to be our chemists, to analyze the soil, to analyze the plants or bacteria or different sensors, biosensors, to analyze the environment and then to send us information what kind of chemical analysis they made, instead of we doing the chemical thing. Another idea which this James Bridle draws on in order to then reach his kind of suggestion about technology is, this is the structure of every computer. It has input, then it has the CPU unit, which includes memory, control unit. Control unit is the processing power. So you have memory where the data goes, then you have some arithmetic logical unit which connects the memory with the processing power of computer, and this is kind of the RAM. And then you have a processor, where this mathematically data is processed, and then you have output. And on the basis of this, he proposes his so-called server farm, which is a new type of computer. And he says, I'm very serious about it. It's not just a metaphor. It's also, I'm planning to build it. To build it, it might take me 20 years, but I want to build it by using, for example, the mycelium networks as memory. These plants, which are hyper accumulators to use for extracting, and on the left you see some of the plants which are used in Greece exactly for accumulating certain elements, certain metals. Then they dry them out and they take the elements out, the metals, instead of this picture. Like, it's kind of totally different approach. And here, instead of these server farms for memory, to have the mycelium, which is on the right. And processing power comes from something like slime mold, and then for the output we have the leaves, where they give us the interface, how we can read what the processing has happened. And he gives just a few examples of illustration how he imagines that. He says, I call it farm because basically farming is the oldest technology. It's really a technology because the way we do agriculture is really quite invasive since the 10,000 years ago. It's not a new thing. Our approach to technology is not new. The way we think of technology is invasive since the very beginning, because doing agriculture the industrial way, I'm not talking about the native, some ways of symbiotic agriculture which is done by some primitive nations. I'm talking about the way agriculture has been created in the civilizations, in the big empires, for example. Big empires have been born because of agriculture. But as we all know, agriculture is based on monocultures, on excluding certain cultures, on growing the most fastest and the easily growing species, and many things which actually exclude symbiotic relationships, exclude the communication between plants and other insects and animals and bacteria. And instead of that, we kill them. We preserve the culture. We use all the soil nutrients in the soil, and in order to sustain this kind of thing, we put new nutrients in the soil which are chemical, and we also kill a lot of things with a lot of chemicals in order to, because of course these plants become very vulnerable to anything. Because in a symbiotic nature they are not vulnerable because they balance each other, but in industrial agriculture, monoculture is very vulnerable. And so he gives example with a few very different type of kind of things. One is the backhello in Normandy since 30 years. It's a kind of example of permaculture and sustainable farm. The other one is the so-called garden of cosmic speculation, where mathematical things are implemented. It's just an illustration. It's not, he says, this is not how I will build my farm, but it's more like references to something which he thinks as the other thing he says is certain temporary farms near the cities or in the cities which are temporary. It means this year you grow wheat, but the next year you grow nothing or something else. So the idea is that not to use land always for the same thing, but to let plants kind of decide and choose what kind of nutrients are in the soil at this moment and which plants are most suitable for that. Because different plants use different types of nutrients. And also he gives some also unrealized project, utopian project called Dolphin Embassy, to show the idea about collective sharing of knowledge production. Knowledge production based on the fact that we listen to other living beings and take them as collaborators and understand them as knowledgeable systems who know best what is in the local, because he says, for example, in Greece there is in the range of 10 kilometers where one of these plants, which are hyper collectors, live, and this means that the plant knows better about the environment, about the local soil than anybody else, because it knows how to survive and how to live in this particular environment. So the idea is to start listening and asking the living beings and treat them in a totally different way than we treat them now, just as resources. Humanize knowledge is. He also says that basically artificial intelligence, what it shows us is that there exists, it's not so good per itself, it's more like it shows us that there exist very different types of intelligences than the human one. And once we understand that there are very different types of intelligences, we can think of other intelligences than human, artificial. We can see intelligence everywhere around us and see it for what it is. Like the intelligence of the octopus is very different from the intelligence of the bee hive, or from the intelligence of the ants hive, or from the intelligence of the bacteria or the slime mold, or the plants. So all these are different systems which are intelligent and have their own ways of processing information and making knowledge. And so if we are capable of listening to it, and this is just a quotation from him, what the server farms, his server farm, seeks to calculate, I don't know yet. I just know we face a bunch of really big problems that we don't really know how to formulate the questions for. I'm pretty sure that the way we've been going about it isn't working, and the world is always waiting for us to ask the right questions and to provide at least some of those answers. It requires a lot of work from us and a lot of listening. So this is the whole idea of this work. And because, let's say, I assume someone might ask, why is it art? What makes it art? And in contemporary, in the understanding of the relation between, for example, art, technology, and nature, there is one quotation from Nietzsche, from The Birth of Tragedy, but from the edition of 1872. You can't find it in The Birth of Tragedy, but Heidegger quotes it a lot. And it's the following: we have to see science under the optics of artists and of art, but art under the optics of life. What does it mean? It means that technology and science are limited in their attitude to how they know the world. They have certain limitations, which are both the way they do it, but also what they can learn. Just because this is the method of science, it has limits. It has to learn, it can learn things which are from the physical world. While art provides a different types of picture, it provides a picture which is wider. It includes things like consciousness, things like our sensitivity and connection to the bigger things in the world, and invisible in a way which science doesn't really, cannot calculate or cannot explain. But I'm not talking about ghosts and God here exactly. I'm talking about the phenomena like consciousness, the phenomena of the totality of thinking, of our connection between ourselves, for example, or our connection with the place. For example, our connection with the place is not just a bunch of scientific laws. It also includes some kinds of emotions, some kind of ethics, some kind of values. It relates to a lot of things which are not really calculable and not really cannot be studied in a scientific way. That's why science and technology has to be provided somehow, has to be immersed into the ethics and aesthetics and art, and not the other way around. Why is it so important to point to this? Because we live now in a way that technological and scientific view becomes the only truth about the world, and at least in the Western world, but generally it's supposed to be, it's super invasive. The technology is super invasive the way it sees the world, and things like humanity, philosophy, art becomes pushed on the side. They're still living, they still exist, but I don't know how much you know, but they get less and less funding in the universities. 10 years ago they started closing philosophy departments in universities because they don't think they're important enough. And why they are not important? Because they don't bring profit. Art and philosophy are not supposed to bring profit, or literature, or all these humanities sciences, but they basically give us something which cannot be calculated into profit, and at least not in this type of profit. And so the thing is that science and technology, this view tries to become ever evasive, to become ground of itself, instead of the ground being more like a static attitude, and the ground of art has to be life, because life is the most, first of all, creative force, and second, it's what sustains everything else. Life is much more complex than anything, because art is kind of still human endeavor. So the thing is, if we don't have these grounds, if we don't know the places of these things, if we change the place and science and technology replace what the ground is, it means that it starts treating life itself as a resource, pure resource, and that leads to disasters. That's why it's art, this word, because it's a political gesture, but art cannot really separate itself from some political gestures in order to raise questions and criticize certain modes of thinking or certain modes of doing things.
I was curious to know how this artist is presenting all this information or all this research, all this art.
James Bridle himself, he has a talk on this particularly, and also he has books, and I guess he has other works which are presented in different ways, but he writes books. This work particularly is still in concept, but he also, it's not just a concept, he works already with some scientists in France and in Greek, so he produces these plans, and he thinks how to build it, he works on it, but the way he presents it is still in terms of concept, because it's just still an idea. Yeah, you're right, that's a good question, because if it was finished work, then it would look more like a work of art maybe, and would be more convincing in these terms. But it's still actually an idea, more of an idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a performance, I don't know, lecture performance. This is still within the frame. I was just...
Yeah, so far I've seen this talk, but
yeah.
It might be.
Okay.
He might do some small things. Yeah. Okay, this artist was the most kind of just conceptually idea, then it would be more obvious it's art, because they are finished works. As I said, from now it starts the more obviously aesthetic and artistic part. Like all the works are no questionably artistic. So the next artist is Tomás Saraceno. I guess some of you probably have heard of him. But I hope, or I guess you haven't really heard into detail, so I will go through detail to several of his works. The first one is related to flying. Humans have always, this is his quotation, humans have always dreamt of flying. Today that dream has become a nightmare. But what if we could fly differently? So again, we here have this kind of attitude of the artist to question technology we all know, and we don't even imagine anything else. And the idea of artists, the role of the artist is to be capable of imagining radically new alternative, radically different from what we can even think. So what he came about with is a kind of balloons, but not just balloons and flying objects, but even flying object which was capable of lifting a human being for 16 kilometers, for 16 minutes and 67 meters distance in the 2020. And what is interesting about this type of balloon is that it flies without fossil fuels, batteries, lithium, solar panels, helium, hydrogen, and carbon emissions. So nothing, it doesn't use anything but sun, the sun energy, and somehow this sun energy heats the way the balloon is positioned and lift it up. Don't ask me how. And so this journey set 32 unprecedented world records recognized by the Federation Aeronautic International, with Aerosane pilot Leticia Noemi Marquez, who flew with the message, "Water and life are worth more than lithium," like the battery, the lithium which is used for batteries, and again, it's a rare element, rare earth element, which costs a lot of destruction of earth in order to get. And we use it in all electronics, all batteries. So he created an Aerosane Foundation, which is a non-profit organization devoted to community building, scientific research, artistic experience and experiment, and education. This Aerosane Foundation actively seeks to devise new modes of sensitivity, reactivating a common imaginary towards an ethical collaboration with the environment and the atmosphere. So he pays a lot of attention to air. The air we breathe, I'm not going to show, but he has also works which capture the air we breathe and the pollutants in a way which shows that it's unequally distributed. So the pollution is distributed unequally, and some people suffer much more, and these people usually are black and marginal people. So he uses air a lot. And he explains in one of his talks how he came to work with air as a child. But I'm not going into this because we have no time. So other types of floating objects he created as well, different types, and he calls it float only with the sun. And so it's called moving atmospheres, kind of exhibition as well, different types of models. And it's a structure which uses ETFE, some kind of durable translucent polymer, which is very light, and it can float at altitudes between 20 and 40 kilometers. And the design of this sculpture is built on scientific experiments begun by the French Centre National of Études spatial, about space, but not cosmos, but where Thomas Saraceno was artist in residence throughout 2012. So beginning in the late 70s, this French group began to launch infrared radiation balloons into the upper levels of the atmosphere. These structures are made of two different lightweight materials, transparent and mirror foils, through which the latter reflects part of the sun's radiation, preventing the air envelopes from overheating. At night, the transparent section tempers the temperature inside the envelope, absorbing infrared radiation emitted from the Earth's surface, the solar heat that the planet accumulated during the day. So through this kind of system, it floats without anything else but sun heat. But yeah, I'm not a technician, so I don't really get it quite how. So on this way, they also built and give or sell the Aerosine backpack kit, which allows everyone to try to fly in this way. Or they also have on their website, they provide an ability for you to build. There is instructions, and you can download certain packs of information and to build either yourself or in a DIY do it together fashion. This is all about ethical approach of doing things together. You can build the same thing and try to experiment. And it's kind of motto, poetic motto, float at the bottom of the ocean of air, challenge political borders, experience stillness in motion, and become the wind. So the idea is to change our attitude to air, to start noticing air in a different way, and the way we breathe, and the way, like his dream is to float like spiders, basically, because this is how he was inspired. And so his other works are with spiders a lot, and he was inspired by the ability of spiders to lift their bodies in the air and basically be suspended in the air in a very creative ways. But here we will focus on a different thing. So remarkably sensitive to the components of air, to its pressure, to the vibrations it conveys, spiders are connected to everything that vibrates. They are as earthly as they are aerial. They offer us alternative, more attuned ways of living together or sharing worlds. And this is a philosopher, Vinciane Despret. She's working on symbiosis and but philosophically, on the way we symbiotically co-create our world. And the works of this artist, Tomás Saraceno, is with spiders is also about symbiotic relationships and interspecies collaboration, not only with humans but also between the spiders themselves. So there was an exhibition. He had many exhibitions around the world, but this is from one exhibition in Paris, in Tokyo Palace, which was called On Air. So there he presented this kind of cubes, but big cubes. Actually, I happened to be there, so it was really fantastic, which were full of big spider nets. And also he presented other of his works in different, it was quite complex solo exhibition. So here he presents a complex architecture of spider nets, which is created by different species of spiders. And as far as I understood, he puts first one species of spider to create certain architecture in this cube, then he removes it or kills it. I'm not absolutely sure, but this is what I understood. Then he puts another species which builds on top of this architecture, but sometimes I think maybe he uses the two species to create in different parts of the thing, and at the end the result is, because if he kills it, it's not really a collaboration that much, but I guess he also puts together and species of spiders which never will come together if it's not for this approach, and then they build on intricately between each other in the same space.
So how many species?
2, 3 sometimes, and you can see a lot of different nets in the net, and very differently woven nets. And here, this is it's called Sounding the Air. One of the one of the works in the exhibition was he had microphones in some of the nets, but really micro microphones, which would register vibration, and even he had some living concerts with taking the sound and amplifying the sound of the vibration of the net and making it into a kind of instrument. And it's all about paying attention to the invisible vibration around us, which spiders are really good at catching and interacting with and taking. And so not only in this, but he notes that through vibration they truly connect to the world in a very complex way. And one of his works, these are spider nets again, but he takes it as a illustration of actually a so-called cosmic web, because the networks of assembling dark matter providing the mesh on which the large-scale structure of the universe is composed, and ordinary matter is gravitationally attracted to some densest parts of the cosmic web, and there are galaxies and clusters, as we all know, which are formed but leaving large, relatively empty voids. So some scientists observed that complex three-dimensional spider webs resemble, and we are talking three-dimensional, as you see, it was an architecture and not just the two-dimensional spider web we know. They resemble computer simulations of the cosmic web. So scientists noticed this correlation between the spider nets and the computer simulations of cosmic web. Building on this analogy, Tomás Saraceno invented for the first time an original technique for 3D scanning, digitizing and reconstructing spider webs. So this is basically based on a 3D scanning. So he is an artist, but at the same time he works, of course, with scientists and engineers, but it was his idea and he invented the way to technically digitize the spider web's logic and reconstructing it in digital way. And then his inventions are used into scientific experimentations and studies. The visual vibratory signals of the laser reveals the hidden architectural entanglements woven by the spider. Maybe spiders, whose vibratory sensitivities are far more developed than those of humans, can already perceive dark matter building their complex mazes according to its invisible score. So this is his idea, but generally it's again to point to the fact that certain animals around us have senses, have abilities, have knowledge which we cannot reach, and when we reach it, it's because our technology allows us to see that actually they probably have it. So they have developed senses which, if we observe and trust their intelligence instead of ignoring it just because it's not like ours, we will be able to learn a lot of things. Another thing which he built again on the basis of these ideas, these are man-made threads made of certain metal, but of different thinness, and they vibrate on different frequencies, and so people can touch them and create sounds. This was again in Tokyo Palace in Paris, but also he did it in other places. So every kind of string reverberates on a different frequency, and this is a way which creates, but these frequencies are not just random. He uses the frequencies for the smaller, for example, smaller nets, nets or cluster of nodes. He uses certain hertz frequencies which are characteristics for some spider species, for their courtship signals. And for others, he uses for bigger one, he uses the frequencies of other species. So in this way, people can have the sense of being into this net and really touching and communicating with each other through frequencies, which they did, which is interactive and kind of performative work. And so, yeah, this was about Saraceno. Do you want to ask some questions?
Amazing work. Amazing work.
Yeah, I like him a lot. And he's doing really, he lives in Berlin. So if somebody has...
Yeah, but about our ability to get these frequencies, different hertz. So he adopted those to from the spiders to us to hear.
Yeah, I think, yeah, because the structure is bigger, probably it's amplified. So it's a kind of, reverberatory architecture. So for us to kind of feel a little bit more about vibration and how maybe spiders are experiencing the world.
Sorry, what about the form? It's looking like an internal structure of a molecule, for example.
This one?
Or, yeah.
It's like a big room which is full of this kind of net structure. So you have to enter like
the
this.
Forms, I see kind of molecules or inner structures.
Yeah, there are inner structures of different largeness, different size of nodes which are connected like nets. So you see there are certain nets, but then you have another net which is bigger.
So each sculpture is a different instrument, let's say.
They're interconnected, but at the same time, inside of this interconnected net of structures, you have smaller one which emit different frequency. So
like this in photo.
yes, because they're connected in the whole room is connected with different threads, but these threads inside have nodes. Like in the internet, you have smaller nodes, smaller clusters. And yeah, you have clusters and so they, different clusters, different size clusters emit, they are connected with smaller or thinner threads. So for example, they have thinner threads or thicker threads, and each thread emits different frequency.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Do the structures imitate like a structure which spiders originally make?
I think yes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Although, as you see here, there is more like a globe.
Yeah.
But-
spiders don't make this. Like
Yeah,
It doesn't
yeah.
look like
No.
this. I think it's now it's his own interpretation.
Already designed.
Yeah, it's probably interpretation in terms of how it looks like, but he tries to keep more the frequency to be reflecting the spiders. Because it's interpretation, of course, not one-to-one, because as you see, these kind of structures, they're all different, so it cannot be completely the same.
Upon this research, he made it differently.
Yeah, and it's algorithmically made, so of course it's more probably regular, it's more mathematical, it's a structure where human can enter, so of course it's interpretation in terms of visually and how it is in the space, but he tries, as far as I understand, to keep at least to some extent the frequencies of the smaller clusters and bigger clusters to emit different types of frequencies, and from what I've read, these frequencies are based on the frequencies of the spiders themselves. And while this is really a microphone on a spider thread itself. It's not made from human.
Is it a video?
No, unfortunately not. Even when I was there, there was a performance when you could hear it. It's not all the time, but you can see the microphones to certain nets, how they're... These are microphones which are, what was the name? They're touch microphones which catch vibration, not sound waves.
Outdoor microphones.
What?
Contact microphone.
Yeah, contact microphones, yes. So, do you want me to continue, or you want to? Okay. So, next artist which I present, his two of his works is called Gilberto Esparza, and it's a quite environmental work. He works with pollution and pollution, and especially water pollution, which is well, at least the works I'm going to show, and also with sound, I think. So the first work is called Nomadic Plants, and he did the other one in the same time, the period of 2008-2014, and he built a real robot which is powered by solar panels, yes, and this robot moves to lake or to a water basin where it's polluted. It uses the water, cleans it through bacterial fuel, like using bacteria which can process this kind of pollution.
The one you showed us before, like those kind of plants?
No, these are plants which can accumulate metals, heavy metals.
The previous ones.
Yeah, and here you have bacteria. You have, like, I think this yellow thing is a bacterial, what was the name called for bacteria?
Containers?
No, it's called bacteria. It's called when they grow bacteria. There is a name in the lab. Incubators. Yes. So it's an incubator for specific types of bacteria which are capable of processing and cleaning the water in a bio-way. It's used also now. They try to replace in industry as well, to use bacteria a lot to clean water, to produce things, biofuel, etc., etc. So this is using this kind of bacteria, cleaning the water, and the water goes to the plants, which are in the robot, to fuel them, to give them water. But the idea is that this kind of species, as he says, these robots are species which can live only as soon as there is polluted water, and these new species cannot live after that because they need polluted water to survive. It's a metaphor. But it's metaphor, but at the same time it's real thing. And yeah, of course he works with engineers and biologists to do this. Yes, so he did this project in Mexico, where there are 70% of the rivers are polluted, and he tried to talk about the pollution of rivers with people, but he noticed that it's not super easy to first the kids went to his plan to notice, then the parents joined to ask about things, and then the school teachers. And just because this is also a kind of educational project to raise the awareness, this is one of the things which artists do. They translate something into artworks or something playful in order to raise awareness about certain pollution, and yeah. Okay, so the other work of this artist is called Biosonot. It's done during the same period, but instead of cleaning water, it's more an approach where he takes water from different polluted rivers or lakes, especially rivers, and again somehow process the bacteria who live in these waters. So that's the really interesting thing, is that what scientists have found and what people have found is that every pollution, even if it's the most toxic, like the Brooklyn, there is some, let's see how it goes. The Gowanus Canal in Brooklyn is one of the most polluted things on the planet, and it's like it's called like a black mayonnaise. It's so polluted that it's like super toxic. And what they notice, some artists work with this canal, or some DIY scientists, they notice more than 42 species which don't exist, of bacteria and things which don't exist. Of course, they don't know all the species of bacteria, but which are new and which can survive in these polluted waters. And generally, what people learn more and more is that regardless of how polluted one place is, there are always bacteria which can. They don't only survive, they get born, they get mutated to the point in order to begin to clean this thing to survive. And when they survive, they clean it because they consume exactly the toxic chemicals which will kill all the other living beings. And the idea of this artist is that if we leave and stop polluting, if we leave the nature, it will clean itself. But what he do with this biosonot work, he takes in this incubator a bacteria from different rivers and sonifies it. Somehow he puts, I think through electricity, taking the electrical charges, because this is the most typical way to sonify bacteria, to sonify microorganisms or flowers or plants. You put some electrodes to get the electrical charge, but his idea is that because every bacterial ecosystem in different polluted waters is different because of the different chemicals, it produces different sound. And again, he's trying to create a library on the internet which accumulates all these different sounds, and for example, these to be taken by artists and used in different ways, performative, and etc. So this is another interesting work which I want to show, because it's, but I will show it in video, so I will go to the internet. She's a Norwegian artist who is working in an environment. She puts this, it's from textile, these screens, but they have certain thing which registers pH level, and as you see here, this is the wash. So in this way, it kind of registers the pH level of the water, and also how the tides, it's called tides, how the tides are raising, how the climate change makes waters raising. It's more like a video. And I think it's worthy of showing just a moment. And at the end, the result of it, the work itself, is time-lapse video. It's probably in Norway or in Finland, because there is a really, I wanted to also mention to you two really cool programs in Finland, and it's another one in Slovenia, which is similar to this camp, but it's more about art, science, and technology. And in Slovenia, it's called PIF Camp, and it's about DIY Bauju, and they do different types of workshops and different types of things related to, always to some science and technology, but I didn't have time, I don't think I have time to show much. And the other one is in Finland, in very north of Finland, in Lapland, in the northeast part, they have a laboratory. It's called BioArt Society. It's the people who run this program together with a real lab in this place, but I can't pronounce the name. It's Finnish and very difficult. And they run every year 2 types of residencies. One residency is field works, where people together go and try to collect things from the environment, but the environment is really on the north, or also almost on the very northern part of Finland. And the other one is more classical bioart residence, where you can do some work as well, and you can check on the website. So it's a video performative work, but it's related directly to climate change and to pH also.
What is the period of time the video is taking?
Hmm?
I mean, how long is the video taking?
I don't know.
A long time, it looks.
It's time lapse. It's certainly a time lapse, but I don't know exactly how many hours.
Maybe one day.
I would say 24
day.
hours or something when you have a tight, but I guess she has different works, different installations of this, where she experiments and sees how the level is raising.
So I saw how the level was rising, and this is signified by the fabricated light. But how do you understand it to the pH level?
pH level is exactly because I think this red thing measures the pH.
As the one you took for self-measurement, kind of.
Maybe the color is different if yes, because the texture, the textile itself has certain chemical which can measure this too. Karine Bonneval, she is a French artist, and this is what I wanted to show here is a video again. I can probably if I try. She tries to capture again with a with a scientist and with bioacoustician. She works to capture the sound of the soil. And what happens is that she's the first to ask what is actually the sound of the soil. And then after she started to ask as an artist, scientists started to ask the same question, it seems. And so she created certain structures from ceramics, which looks like mushrooms, and of course with amplifiers she worked with bioacoustician to amplify the sound of the soil and of the living, showing how lively the soil is, how much life there is in the soil. So it's again to making the invisible visible, using science, but in an artistic way. Écoutez le terre. Voilà.
This one.
Да. И това е в галерия. So, просто някакси. Yes, this is just to hear what is actually heard. So this is one work of this Eric Berger. Eric Berger is the founder of this BioArt Society and the director, and he also works a lot with radiation and tries to. He was even in CERN. He had a residency in CERN, I think, just recently. So he works with radiation, and one of his works is to visualize radiation in the landscape. And the previous video, which I wanted to show, is a project of a Japanese artist who uses something which is called furin in Japan, which is for the wind bell, very really nice thing, which also in Japan is considered that it captures the negative energy or something like that, or negative smell, and he uses to actually capture radiation which naturally is present in our environment. So he takes the radiation through Geiger counter or something, and this bell is ringing very gently to capture this radiation and to show us the invisible presence of radiation around us. And this is an artist, Juliet Longman, who is working big structures from seaweed. And the other artist, he was in this exhibition video I wanted to show you. If you're interested, I can play it after that. But it's really, let's leave just the videos. It's photography, but of course very artistic, of after Chernobyl or after some radiation exposure of different frogs. And well, this is again sound of a river of another artist, which he captures the sounds of river in general, not necessarily polluted, but more like different sounds. He shows in what kind of sounds you can have in a river. That's Karine Bonval again, the structure I told you that she creates certain bubble around the tree, and then you breathe, but it's a movie which you cannot watch the whole. It's more like she's probably releasing it in certain setting, and she creates a movie where you have this performance from her where she breathes into the tree and breathes from the tree, because the idea is that what the trees breathe out as waste is what we breathe in, because this is the oxygen for us, and what we breathe out for the trees is actually what they breathe in. And this idea of this interdependence and this symbiosis is what she accentuates. And then here is several works about bees, and this is artificial intelligence work which designs, and you can go again online to see, because you can design your own garden using the algorithmic of this artist, artificial intelligence, to tell you what kind of flowers you can grow in a patch of garden in order to attract the most pollinators. So this is a garden which is created for pollinators, for insects, and not for people, by artificial intelligence, using technology, using artificial intelligence to serve insects and pollinators and their